What's up, guys? I'm Joe. Today I'm talking about the new Weezer album, Pacific Daydream. So Weezer is back with their 11th studio album. Gotta admit, I was pretty hyped up for this one. They're coming off a pretty good streak. Admittedly, and a lot of Weezer fans would probably attest to this, they've been pretty hit or miss throughout their career. They've had some great moments, such as the Blue Album, Pinkerton, Maladroit, stuff like that. And, a lot of middle-of-the-road albums. Make Believe, obviously, they went for a much more, stripped-down commercial sound. Kind of continued on stuff like Gratitude and Hurley. Albums of which I thought had, some okay moments here or there, and then overall were mostly just underwhelming. But recently the band's been on a really good streak. Between the albums, Everything Will Be Alright in the End, and the White Album, which came out just last year, we've seen a pretty, solid return to that original Weezer-type sound. There's definitely always a commercial, hooky element to the band, somewhat poppy in a sense, but, going back to that kind of four-chord, guitar-driven type stuff, while also even offering room for experimentation. With Everything Will Be Alright in the End, you had that Future Scope trilogy at the end of the album, which was pretty cool. And the White Album, you had Thank God for Girls, which was, pretty more modern poppy than we had heard from them in the past. Overall, that sound did not dominate the album. What we got was a nice beachy, summery feeling album, obviously Beach Boys influenced. River Cuomo offering some very melodic, very catchy melodies all throughout. But it had like a nice kind of vintage vibe to it, that last album. It was definitely one of my favorites of the year. So the band turned around and they said they were going to release the Black Album next, which was going to take everything that was on the White Album and do it in a much darker way. It was going to be a sort of counterpart to it. Instead, we have this album, Pacific Daydream. Supposedly the Black Album is still coming at some point, maybe next year, who knows. To me, it kind of seems to be the case that Rivers is preemptively trying to settle everyone down about this album. I feel like he's trying to lower expectations a little bit, the way he had been promoting it, because it offers a slightly different sound for the band, though one I would arguably say is not that different. It sounds like Weezer, it has that kind of four-chord element to it, catchy hooks and melodies. But overall, there's a much more like bass groove-oriented feel here, and then your elements of modern pop, obviously. But I find that those elements are used pretty sparingly. The album kind of has its own unique vibe in the course of Weezer's discography, but it's not overtaken by these modern pop elements. Service level reviews and stuff like that you're gonna see are just like, Weezer goes pop, that kind of thing. But, it sounds like Weezer. There's just those elements added to it. Admittedly, I was a little nervous going into this one. I had heard some of the singles and none of them were really catching my ear, and it was unfortunate that I thought this was going to be one of the more middle-of-the-road albums for them, which I'd say it probably is, but I think I like it a lot more than I did at first. It's certainly grown on me after a lot of listens. Feels Like Summer is an example of one of those songs that, it took some time to grow on me. It is probably the most poppy-sounding one as far as the modern elements go. It's very catchy, but there's a lot of electronics dancing around the background, those kind of sampled vocal lines, and overall a slightly more electronic drum sound and just very, bumping with the bass, which I do like. I do like that the bass player is, put on pretty good display on this album. But, I did read that Rivers paid specific attention to, what's going on, top 50 charts, stuff like that. What melodies get repeated, how much does that happen, when are higher vocals used as opposed to lower vocals. Here, that very falsetto high chorus line just sounds very typical of what's going on in pop music. Mexican Fender, though it's the first song, is probably the standout for me. It's the most, typical Weezer song as far as heavy power chords go. It kind of starts to sprinkle in the sort of electronics you're going to get a little bit throughout the album, but, it doesn't overdo it, makes for a nice anthem-sounding song. What I do like about it is, some of the weirder moments on the track, and you kind of see stuff like that very sparsely placed throughout the album. The example in Mexican Fender, that, that bridge where, the drums really start to build up and the chord progression changes and it gets a very 70s classic rock kind of vibe to it almost, and those weirder moments are what stand out to me on this record. Another example of that would be the song QB Blitz is another one I really like on here. This is a cool song because it kind of sounds like some of the poppier moments of the White Album, the Beach Boys-esque type pop that they did on that record, and that, is making its way onto here as well, where it's acoustic driven, but very big on the melody. But, this one offers that kind of bass groovy vibe as well. But, I personally like where the chord progression changes and takes a slightly darker turn in that bridge there. It's cool with, you know, the way this very melodic line from Rivers is juxtaposed over these, you know, slightly darker chord progressions going on here. It makes for like a pretty cool dynamic there. Get Right is another one that, you know, obviously is going for that modern pop sound as far as that, you know, that stomping bass is going all the way throughout. But I think just the groovy aspect and the acoustic guitar that goes along with it just kind of makes it work for me as well. Unfortunately, the song Beach Boys is one of my least favorite moments on here. I just found that it to be like kind of boring. It doesn't really go anywhere. Kind of sounds like it wants to be Thank God for Girls, the way Rivers, you know, vocal melody kind of dances along the groovier side of the song. And La Mancha Screwjob kind of gets a little carried away with the whoa vocals. You know, that's a big aspect of modern, you know, pop music nowadays, those whoa-oh-ohs. You gotta have those, apparently. But, you know, it gets a little, you know, carried away with those. A little bit too much of that going on there. I'd say, like, that's an example of one of the songs that kind of just dives a little too far for me into, you know, really trying to emulate modern sounds. Any Friend of Diane's, you know, it doesn't close this album nearly as effectively as the last record closed. Endless Bummer was a great song, and I just love the acoustic build-up to just that huge outro. You don't really have that going on here. You know, it's a pretty standard song. It's got an acoustic sound to it. Fits along that vibe of this record, that kind of more chilled out, groovier vibe. It offers like some pretty good melodies, so it makes for an okay closer. And the same goes for a song like Sweet Mary, where I feel like, you know, not much changes, not much goes on, but, you know, the decent melodies hold it down well enough. Weekend Woman is one I like. You know, you're definitely hearing those Beach Boys influences as far as like the that bridge section goes. You know, Rivers' vocals are just, you know, that have that classic 60s or 70s pop feel to them. I feel like Weezer, you know, ultimately kind of works better in that realm than like really trying to emulate the modern stuff. But again, this album just kind of works for me more than I expected, and it's been growing on me, which I think leaves the song Happy Hour, which seems like it's pretty hit or miss with people. Some people like it, some people hate it. I actually really enjoy this one. I think it just has a great groove to it. That bass is just bumping real high in the mix. Rivers' vocal melodies just dance over that line, you know, very well. And overall, just a very groovy, laid-back kind of feel. Kind of funky, kind of soulful in a way. So, you know, that song just kind of works for me. Even if, like, you know, the lyrical content isn't anything special. Which, you know, the same can be said about the rest of the album. But, you know, it's just somewhat of a fun record. I think the fact that it came out in October is kind of weird. It definitely has a summer-type vibe. But I think they intended for it to come out earlier, and it was ultimately delayed. So yeah, Pacific Daydream, you know, ultimately an album that is a slightly different sound for Weezer. It doesn't deviate too far. They haven't gone full pop here. They are emulating some of those modern sounds, and that was the intention. What you ultimately get is, you know, Weezer with a bit more groove, a bit more laid back, a bit more, you know, feel in the rhythm sections. You know, with a sprinkling of some electronics and, you know, sampled layering vocals and stuff like that. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. I think it's a pretty okay album. So yeah, let me know what you think of the album in the comments, whether you liked it, whether you hated it. Don't forget to check out some other reviews on the channel. There's plenty up, plenty more on the way. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.